By video conference, the proceedings are public and are made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware the webcast will show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Regular members know this by now, but as a reminder, and for the benefit of our witnesses who participate in the House of Commons virtual committee meeting for the first time, I should remind you all of a few rules that we like to follow. Interpretation in this video conference will work very much like a regular committee meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. As you are speaking, if you plan to alternate from one language to the other, you will need to also switch the interpretation channel so it aligns with the language you are speaking. You may want to allow for a short pause when switching languages. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you are ready to speak, you can click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. Should members have a point of order, they should activate their mic and state that they have a point of order. If a member wishes to intervene on a point of order that has been raised by another member, I encourage him or her to use the raised hand function. In order to do so, you should click on participants at the bottom of the screen. When the list pops up, you will see next to your name that you can click raise hand. This will signal to me, the chair, that you're of your interest to speak, and will keep the names in a chronological order. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. The use of headsets is, of course, strongly encouraged. Finally, when speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. That's the one I have trouble with. Should any technical challenge arise, for example, in relation to interpretation, or a problem with your audio arises, please advise the chair immediately and the technical team will work to resolve them. Please note that we may need to suspend during these times as we need to ensure all members are able to participate fully. Before we get started, can everyone click on their screen in the top right-hand corner and ensure they are on gallery view? With this view, you should be able to see all the participants in a grid view. It will ensure that all video participants can see one another. I would now like to, of course, welcome our witnesses who are with us here today. As individuals, we have Dan Edwards, Fisher, West Coast Aquatic, accompanied by Kathy Scarfo, President, West Coast Trawlers Association. From the Aero Trading Company Limited, we have Brad Miro. And from Whoosh Innovations, we have Vince Bryan, Chief Executive Officers. We'll get started now with the presentation of the witnesses, and we'll start, of course, with, I don't know who's speaking, Mr. Edwards or Kathy on behalf, or you're both speaking? You may be on mute.
We're both speaking, Mr. Chair.
Okay, 6 minutes or less, please. You're now up.
Yeah, I'll begin, and thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and for the committee to have a chance for me to talk to you. I'm a non-Indigenous third-generation fisherman living in a small coastal village of Ucluelet on the west coast of Vancouver Island. I spent 40 years trolling for salmon in BC out of this community. I spent 15 years as the chair of a salmon enhancement society. I presently am the executive director of the Area 8 Crab Association, the largest crab fishery in BC, which thankfully is seeing record abundances in their fishery, although they are presently dealing with very depressed prices for their product, supposedly due to COVID. But due to the lack of transparency in the BC market, who knows what the truth is on that front. I also own a groundfish longline vessel in partnership with my son and continue to be an active fisherman. I was the executive director of an Indigenous, non-Indigenous, non-profit board built on the principle of a double majority during the 90s that helped to negotiate an aquatic management board for the west coast of Vancouver Island, New Chalmers territory, under an intermeasures agreement under the mandate of the Oceans Act. I went on a 59-day hunger strike to try and get help for BC fishing communities when the Fraser sockeye collapsed in 1999. And because Wayne Wouters, who was the Deputy Minister of Fisheries at the time, had suspended the negotiations to build the Aquatic Management Board. Out of the hunger strike, I got a commitment from Minister Dollywall to review the consultative process for salmon in BC. The review was started by Stephen Owen and his dispute resolution group out of the University of Victoria, which came up with 49 recommendations to be implemented as a package. They were not to be cherry-picked. Pacific region implemented 4 or 5 of those recommendations, twisted the recommendations so that the final framework for consultation was even worse than when I first got involved in the consultative process back in the 80s. They completely cut out the community input, and the moment the Aquatic Management Board was brought into reality under the mandate of the Oceans Act in 2001, a senior DFO official who has since retired told me that Pacific Region senior management in downtown Vancouver stated internally that they now had to find a way to kill it. And they have done a very good job of doing just that. They refuse now to sit on the board as one of the governing parties. I now live in a coastal community that has lost most of its infrastructure and its fishermen in respect to the salmon fishery. Without the vision of the Aquatic Management Board, which is based on Newfoundland's principles of respect and that everything is connected, the implementation of the reconciliation agenda of the federal government is creating division and disunity. As I work on my boat in Ukiel Harbor, First Nation and non-First Nation fishermen are being set up to fight each other right on the docks in our community over the remaining access to ocean Chinook and coho, while the federal government gives the lion's share of the resource to the commercial recreational fishery with absolutely no transfer mechanism to deal with the disenfranchisement. I have published an article in Samudra that lays out how this is a breaking of the human rights of the citizens who were treated by this way by their own government, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous fishermen. My longline vessel was tied up this summer after fishing for years for 15% of the landed value of the fish I caught because of the unregulated market created by ITQ management regimes, in which much of it is now owned and controlled offshore. I can no longer afford to untie the vessel to go fishing. My daughter did her PhD thesis on the situation with the halibut fishery, and we explained this very clearly to the FOPO committee over the last couple of years. Yet Pacific Region continues to minimize the concerns that we raised about the management regime that has been used in BC to kill off the small independent owner-operator fleet. I am extremely angry about this situation. It is a management tragedy. The definition of a tragedy is when you learn too late that you should have done things differently. I actually did not want to participate in this call when I first got the invitation. I asked Kathy Scarfo to do it. I am too angry and frustrated to speak anymore about a situation that for 30 years has been ignored by the Pacific Region. My head is bloody from beating against that unaccountable, terrible bureaucracy. I'm reminded of something a DFO enforcement person told me when I was occupying a DFO office in Tofino in 1996. He said, "I wake up every morning ashamed that I work for this organization." My advice, which I'm sure has never been heard or listened to before, but I'm going to say it again, my advice would be that to dismantle the entire organization and start again with proper governance and real consultation, not the sham that is presently being used by this government department. Real governance is needed, of which there are a myriad of good examples of how this is done in respect to the management of natural resources. And real transparency, who exactly owns the Canadian resource, which can be done simply by directives from the federal government. And real reconciliation that respects both parties, which is the directive given by the judge in the last house at all judgment. Taking anyone's livelihood and giving it to someone else without compensation which is what the government did in respect to my salmon livelihood by giving it to the commercial recreational sports industry, is a breaking of human rights, and the federal government has stated they will not do the same with the reconciliation process, and it's just simply more of the same bad behavior that got us into trouble in the first place. I truly hope that they stand by that commitment because they did it once. The door is now open. As Dr. Don Hall, speaking as the representative of Newfoundland, told the court process in the House et al. Case, you gave away the resource that was traditionally fished by the commercial troll fishermen to the sports fishermen. Why would you not do the same thing in respect to our court-reported Indigenous fishery? Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's my comments opening.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. We'll now go to Ms. Scarfo for 6 minutes or less, please.
Hi, I guess 6 minutes to wrap up 30 years worth of fisheries management, fisheries marketing, buying, and being president of the AREG trollers, which are not trawlers. They're the guys that run the single line through the water with hooks on them in different places. The fleet that I manage and have been proud to be a member of and president of for 22 years is a salmon fishery, predominantly Chinook, coho, and sockeye. We are the equity fishery with the U.S., so our catch is predominantly American. The Alaska fleet takes Canadian fish, we take American fish. So we're the equity fleet. We harvest very little Canadian stocks, and that's very important because our impact on Canadian stocks of concerns is marginal at best, and at times just about nothing. The fleet is a small boat fleet, mom and pa operations predominantly, family operations, fishing 5 to 25 miles offshore. Over 1/3 of our fleet is at present time First Nations. We fish side by side with the First Nations, and we have worked very closely over the years to develop different fisheries regimes and programs. I think it's important to recognize that when we talk about the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, it is the Department of Fisheries, not just fish. And right now it feels like it's the Department of Foregone Opportunities in Fisheries, because we have economic opportunities that are there that are being foregone because the department is not managing fisheries as their primary mandate. It's more juggling who gets to fish. And we often hear the statement that there's too many boats catching too few fish. No doubt about it, we have massive conservation problems. We have climate change, ocean habitat that's not, or habitat inland that's not being addressed and not being invested in, salmon enhancement programs that have been gutted. We know all of those things. But on top of that, there are still existing opportunities that would be able to maintain somewhat of a viable fishery. But the juggling of who gets access to those fish and the fact that decisions are not being based on what is absolutely critical in fisheries management, which is first and foremost science and biology, is a major issue. So basically, it is the Department of Foregone Opportunities, and I can speak directly to that this year with our fishery, where our fleet should be having incomes of $80,000 to $100,000 had we been able to move forward with the COVID plan that we presented in April. Instead, we're sitting with guys on the water right now, not making enough fish because income on a day, because the department has put in a lure restriction that basically means that everybody else in British Columbia can use the lures that are catching fish, but we have to use the lures that aren't at this present time. I think when we look at solutions to moving forward, if we are looking at solutions to moving forward, I think the first thing to do is recognize that the situation in British Columbia is a disaster, and we need that disaster relief. We need somebody to call it for what it is, and it is a disaster. 90% of the fleet is not going to survive. They're being forced into bankruptcy. And I think in this situation, we need that disaster relief and recognition, because then we can start to address the real problems. The other thing that we need to recognize is that salmon are not caught on the East Coast. This is a 4-year cycle. This is something that can be rebuilt and can have a future. What we need is, rather than lip service from the ministry and the department, is an actual sense of leadership and governance that is to manage fisheries and to try to do their best. In the Pacific region, that governance model, as Dan says, needs to be addressed. The senior management of the Pacific region does not believe in ocean fisheries. And yet everything we hear and every piece of documentation and every response that you get to your recommendations from the minister talk about economically viable and sustainable fisheries. And yet there is no impetus and no sense of interest from senior management in moving forward on those opportunities. Years ago, we had new government come in and say we were going to allow the unmuzzling of our scientists. Well, you may have unmuzzled them, but now you've got senior management giving directives to the biological staff to not do very critical pieces of work that are absolutely essential to managing fisheries. We cannot have access to the biological staff, the stock assessment staff. And I know that an example is this year, where we put in a fishing plan in the first week of April and only got a fishing plan at the end of July with absolutely no background or conversations with stock assessment. And here we are in season trying to deal with that. We need a department that is basically based on some principles, and some of those need to be fair and equitable, and a transfer mechanism that is actually being used, because otherwise we are pitting user groups and basically fighting over the crumbs of what is left for opportunities. An unlicensed expansion in the charter boat fishery, which is not a public fishery. This is people who have a lot of money that can fly in and fly back out. They've been given priority. They harvest in our region more fish than my First Nation fleets and my commercial fleets combined in any given year, and yet they don't live in the area and they don't provide the jobs for our local community. So social scientists have taken over and are now running the department without any guidance from the federal government as to what the vision of a fishery looks like. Too many boats, too many fish, or not enough fish? Absolutely, but not too many boats in the commercial fishing industry directly. It is too many interest groups that have competing interests that cannot all be satisfied at the level that the department is trying to satisfy them. The department is in a conflict of interest. They are managing buybacks at the same time managing opportunities, which means that basically you bankrupt the fleet and then you offer them the lowest amount of money that they're willing to take because they're forced into bankruptcy. Transfer mechanisms like PIC fee and ATP are being ignored at this point, and fish are being just removed from existing stakeholders, and that's not reconciliation. Reconciliation is not on the back of individual families and fishermen who are neighbors to the people they're trying to reconcile with, and as Dan says, this is causing an emergency situation within our communities. As we
I'm going to have to stop you there, Mr. Scarpa. We're going way over the 6-minute mark. Anything else, hopefully, will come out in line of questioning, or we certainly invite all witnesses to send us a copy of their presentation, and the committee will be able to look at that as well. We'll go now to Mr. Miro for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you. I appreciate the passion of the witnesses that just spoke. Thank you for allowing me to speak today, and greetings from Prince Rupert. My name is Brad Miro, and I am the president and CEO of Arrow Trading, a diversified seafood company operating in BC. I grew up in the commercial fishing industry in Prince Rupert. I started working on my father's salmon boat when I was 8 years old, some 48 years ago. I was a deckhand and a skipper prior to starting work in processing sector 35 years ago. We're a fish processor of BC wild seafood with 2 CFIA regulated plants, one here that I'm speaking from in Port Edward and the other one in the Fraser River in Vancouver. We participate in many fisheries, including salmon, but most of the other fisheries on the coast also. And for some context, I believe we probably have the largest independent small boat fleet in BC. We as a processor exist as our fishermen do by having reliable access to a healthy and sustainable resource. We live or die by the simple access. The fishing industry may seem basic on the surface, catching fish, feeding people, but there are so many factors, some within our control and some outside of our control, that make our industry complex and difficult to manage or predict. I don't think anybody in the commercial industry expects access when true conservation is on the line. I've sat at many tables over the years, and I've never heard the commercial fishermen or companies demand access when we have real conservation problems. But issues such as climate, ocean nutrients, habitat, fish farms, weak stock management, predators, past overfishing, and perhaps even underfishing are just a few of the challenges the industry faces now. The only way to make sure that fish stocks remain healthy, if there is an adequate long-term plan, safeguards in place such as proper and robust science, stock assessment, and a transparent management policy that are fair to all user groups. In speaking to you today about the state of the salmon, I'd like to tell you some of the major changes I've seen during my career. When we built our Port Ed plant in 1986, we experienced rapid growth in production, and for years we operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We employed more than 150 people, 80% from the Indigenous communities surrounding Prince Rupert, from Lac Swillams, Metlakatla, Kitkatla. Today we employ less than half that number. Many jobs have already been lost within the salmon sector, and I suspect many more will be lost if our salmon catches continue to decline. The consequences of this are very dire for our entire infrastructure that has been built over the years on the coast. Many of the fishermen companies exist because they're geared for multi-fishery existence. Removing one tree is removing a leg of a chair. Eventually you will have a collapse. We've already experienced many plant closures in BC, and I suspect we will see more of these. And unfortunately, the hardest hit areas will be the smaller coastal communities where there are already less employment opportunities. Throughout these former exciting times in the fishing business, there was this undeniable sense of optimism and accomplishment and camaraderie that was a joy to have experienced. Those same feelings even extended to DFO and all their staff way back then. In short, the industry was much predictable and cohesive and very fun to be a part of. Today, sadly, those relationships in our industry are strained and the trust has decreased measurably. I'd like to mention also that throughout this long period of decline of salmon and access in BC, I have made so many trips to Southeast Alaska to visit friends that operate plants there. There were so many similarities to our operations and catches. In fact, we do share many common stocks of fish since we are so close geographically. Fast forward to today and the similarities are mostly gone. Walking the docks in Prince Rupert or other coastal communities in BC, you will find less fishing boats and many of these vessels are in a state of disrepair. There's not enough money being earned to maintain vessels adequately. You will also encounter many salmon fishermen that are increasingly jaded, feeling beaten down by years of struggling to survive. They feel disconnected now from the decision-making and basic communication from DFO. Yet only a few kilometers to our north in Ketchikan, you will find a large fleet of beautifully maintained salmon boats with hundreds of young fishermen who are enthusiastic about their future. Many government or government-backed programs exist for them to buy vessels and licenses or upgrade their equipment.
Excuse me, Mr. Moreau.
Yes.
Moreau, could you move the mic
Yes.
a little out from your mouth? It's giving some static at times.
Okay, sorry about that. Sorry about that.
Please continue.
It should also be noted that many of these boats you see tied up in Alaska are actual Canadian fishing vessels that have been sold to American fishermen because fishermen here have been unable to make a living. 30 years ago, we thought we could rival Alaska in salmon production, but today we're just a shadow of what we once were. And the question is, why? Why have we ended up here now in BC faced with declining salmon runs and reduced access while Alaska continues to experience billions of dollars in economic prosperity from their fisheries? And more importantly, their fish stocks appear more healthy and sustainable than ours. I can't say that I know the answer, but could it be that they spend more on stock assessment and science? They have a more transparent management regime. They have no salmon farms. They have higher harvest rates on salmon runs. These are just a few points we must consider in trying to formulate a plan for our future. And I don't just wish to beat up only on DFO here. In fairness to them, they have a lot on their plate. A lot of their employees work very hard, but over the years, they've taken on too many responsibilities that are political in nature, and they do have a conflict of interest, and the fishing fleet feels this. And in closing, I'd like to offer a couple of suggestions. Our industry sadly may have to acknowledge that in the short term, we simply may have too many salmon vessels chasing diminished stocks or diminished access. And the necessary time required to rebuild may simply be too long for fishermen to hang on. So in this case, the federal government should offer a fair price to fishermen to retire their salmon license, but do not make them bid against one another to see who is the most desperate. Allow them to retire with some dignities. Those are the government's own words. I'd also like to control the populations of predators like seals and sea lions. I realize this is a controversial subject, but I've seen reports that they consume more seafood than the entire commercial sector combined. I'd like to see more salmon enhancement programs like Alaska has. It just doesn't make sense to me that we don't enhance our stocks. I'd like to at least see a good study of this. And I do have aspirations and hope for our salmon fisheries in the longer term. And I wish that one day we can walk our docks again and see vibrant young crop of fishermen and have a great salmon fishery again. It's been done elsewhere in the world, and we're a can-do industry, the fishing industry. We should be able to rebuild and put things back on track. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll now go to Mr. Bryan for 6 minutes or less, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee today. We understand that you invited us here because of our work with salmon, including at the site of the Big Bar Slide in the Fraser River. And we want to speak to that as an example of the innovative solutions available to the Pacific conservation and recovery efforts. The state
Mr. Bryan, I'm sorry, this is the clerk. I will just take a second. Could you take the microphone closer to your mouth before you start? Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
The state of our iconic Pacific salmon need our help, and it feels right that the U.S. and Canada have partnered and are working for the recovery of salmon and fisheries in the West, including the Fraser River, historically one of the great Pacific salmon rivers in all the world. We have been working exclusively on fish passage solutions for 10 years all around the world. We believe improved passage is the single most important thing we can do today to assure fish's future everywhere in the world. Our mission at Whoosh is to provide fisheries managers worldwide an entirely new tool set that more affordably addresses fish passage, recognizes the impact of changing climate conditions, accommodates highly variable water levels, and acknowledges that the traditional options available simply have not worked well enough and are not easily changed to give the native fish species their best and fastest chance for spawning success. The importance of the Fraser River to the ecosystems of the West Salish Sea, the resident orcas in its waters, the First Nations on both sides of the border, and to those sport and commercial fishermen who rely on robust returns for their livelihood, reminds us daily of the importance of our mission. As a company, we are not only tackling a problem of enormous complexity, but a problem that must be solved quickly for all of humanity. Big Bar highlights what can be done and how quickly it can happen when decisions are made, new technologies adopted, resources made available, and stakeholders and contractors come together to ensure that there is safe, timely, efficient, and effective fish passage.
Sorry, Mr. Bryan, it's the clerk again. Could you again take the microphone closer?
Okay, it's almost in my mouth.
Thank you.
Okay, Whoosh Innovations' headquarters are located in Seattle, Washington, on the waters of Puget Sound, and about 5.5 hours drive from the Big Bar landslide in British Columbia. DFO contracted with Whoosh on April 15th, 2020 to provide passage for 4 species of salmonids with our passage portal to enable them to continue their upstream migration in June 2020. The Whoosh passage portal allows for a volitional and more natural migration without handling or energy-sapping ladder steps, causing stress prior to reaching their spawning grounds and impacting their fecundity. It is not the original salmon cannon that you hear about in the papers, which requires one to hand load the fish into the system, but a more elegant and automated solution. The passage portal also collects data about every fish that passes through the system, including 18 images of every fish taken from 3 different angles. Our facial recognition technologies are capable of measuring and sorting fish automatically within a fraction of a second. It allows the selected fish to migrate past the barriers, whether natural or man-made, regardless of their height. The system at Big Bar includes 6 tubes of 5 different sizes to accommodate all sizes of the 4 species of salmonids. Each tube is about 150 meters long, and the passage portal capacity can enable passage of tens of thousands of fish per day, or approximately 30 fish per minute. While the system requested and deployed at Big Bar is seasonal, annual, long-term, and permanent deployments are often recommended. The magnitude of the challenge at Big Bar cannot be overstated. The rapids you see in the photos might look to be a manageable 2 to 3 feet high, but when you are on site, you realize that those rapids are 10 to 15 feet tall, and that the watering is moving faster than you've ever seen water move before. When the water runs like this, it becomes immediately clear that natural fish passage is not an option. The burst swimming is not enough. So for those who are working on site, the Canadians must and can be proud of all the work that the long days, the cooperation, and the foresight shown by the project partners there. The rock slide at Big Bar is an enormous slice of a 200-foot cliff that slid into and fell across the 180-foot width of the river at that point. It is technically more difficult problem than Hell's Gate that requires the latest technology solutions and innovative thinking. The goal of everyone is to provide passage this year and then every year to come. And we hope that the Whoosh Passage portal changes the math, allowing for real-time fisheries management decision-making. It is intended to future-proof fish passage against the impacts of changing climates, such as warmer waters, variable water levels from floods or drought, and prevent the spread of invasive species through selective fish passage. and offers a smarter solution with more comprehensive and current data to make fisheries management decisions, such as seeing when pinniped injuries are impacting the fish that are going through the traveling upstream. So why do all of this? Because the impact of not deploying it as such solutions quickly is felt for decades, if not centuries. And if we've learned nothing else from the in this age of COVID, we can take away this much. It's far less costly to act early and aggressively and to capture near real-time data than to delay and be faced with a doubtful future and no certain solutions. At Whoosh, we envisioned a better outcome for native fish species years ago, and we are happy to help bring cutting-edge technology to the solutions at Big Bar today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan. We'll now go to our committee members for a round of questioning. I will remind members that the last half hour of the committee meeting is for committee business, so we will be finishing our questioning approximately a half an hour before the end time. We now go to Mr. Arnold for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being available today. I want to start out with Mr. Edwards. Mr. Edwards, you talked about a pilot program for cooperative active management or cooperative aquatic management with the federal, provincial, the Chalmers, and local governments. Can you tell us how, when, and why the program seems to have been abandoned?
Yes, the board that we created back in 2001 after 10 years of work with the communities and the New Chalmers and the federal provincial government. The federal government spent a couple of years with their pretty large budget together to negotiate that board into existence. As I said in my opening comments, there was never any support from the central agency for this board, and they stated very specifically to me 5 years later that they in fact decided to try and kill it, particularly because it doesn't fit the central management model that they have in place and still have in place in BC. And so, that board is still in existence. I'm still a part of it, but it's become it's lost its budget. The federal government refused to put any money into it, and they refuse to sit at it. And we've asked them several times to reinvigorate their commitment to it. They refuse. The board is now moribund. It's almost non-existent.
What were the goals of that board with the groups involved? The goal was to be a part of the management strategy for the marine resources for the New Chalmers region, which is most of the west coast of Vancouver Island, to work in partnership with other regions and with the central government to properly manage both the sort of biological side of the resources in the region, as well as the socioeconomic objectives that were really critical, particularly in light of the fact that we were seeing at that time back in the 90s, as Brad has stated, we saw a drop in the kind of the value and the access to salmon, and we tried very hard to put principles in place that would say we are going to engage in the management side of it for both socioeconomic and biological, scientific, rational reasons for dealing with the fish and the salmon and other resources in the area. Okay.
That was the point. You. That was the management strategy.
Thank you. And I guess the next section is for Mr. Edwards, Ms. Garfo, and Mr. Murrow. You've all talked about what appears to be a broken system. Some of you have mentioned that consultation seems to be a sham. We've heard this from East Coast fishers as well. The consultation process, is it working as it used to, or where are the roadblocks? What do you see the challenges?
Kathy or Brad, I've already said what I've said about this situation.
I can go if you want. Basically, there is no real consultation. I think that's across all sectors that's been mentioned. The First Nations, actually, we had an emergency meeting with the First Nations in our region yesterday. Dan was involved, where we discussed the fact that the Aquatic Management Board is no longer functional because of pulling up. We, as stakeholders in the region, still believe in the guiding principles, and that maybe we'll just pick them up and run with them ourselves. But the consultation process has been a sham. It basically, you sit through a process where I've seen managers sit and read a newspaper because they know how useless it all is. It doesn't matter what recommendations go forward. Once it gets into senior management hands, it's already a predetermined fact. This year's COVID plan that we put forward in April, we worked with First Nations, with local communities, with buyers to say what's, given the situation that we're facing with world markets and getting people in and out of these communities, how can we do it? And we were told from Ottawa that they would have a quick turnaround response for us because this was COVID related. And we got nothing, absolutely nothing. And even the last few weeks, I've had to phone the minister's office and the MPs and MLAs and everyone just to get a discussion with our local managers, because our guys are out there using the wrong lures and they won't let them change. And you got to recognize some of these things. The fishing industry here has lost a lot of its participation already. The fleet.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to hear from Mr. Morrill on this as well.
Sure. I wouldn't want to tar every advisory process with the same brush, but I'll describe it this way in the north, that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, DFO and the fishing industry would get together for breakfast. We would sit around a table in no particular order. We would have an exchange of ideas and formulate plans. Skip forward to within the last 5 years, they no longer are allowed to have a coffee with us. We have to go into their office. They sit on one side of the table, we sit on the other side of the table. It's much more of a confrontational, but a clear line. They are them and we are us. The complaints I hear most often from my colleagues as well as fishermen, DFO people do not return their phone calls, emails, or texts. They don't make announcements when they say they're going to. So there's just a sense of a disconnect, and I get it.
Mes excuses, Monsieur le Président, j'ai pas de traduction.
Yes.
Je m'excuse, je voulais pas interrompre, mais j'ai aucune traduction depuis près d'une minute, donc si c'est possible de. Merci.
Nancy, I'm not getting any
dont je me doutais,
translation.
merci. Donc c'est la qualité du son qui ne permet pas la
The sound quality does not allow interpretation. I don't know if we could perhaps correct the sound issue so that it would be easier for the interpreters. Thank you.
Okay, let's try going forward, because that 6 minutes was over anyway when we had that point of order. But we'll continue on, and Madam Gill, if it's still not proper or whatever, please let us know as quickly as you can, and we'll try and have it corrected. So we'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all the witnesses for being here. Over our deliberations, we've heard a lot of conflicting evidence, not just in this study, but in other ones. We hear on the one hand that fish stocks are low, that catches are miserable, but at the same time, every time there's some management of the catch, then we hear that the ocean is practically teeming with fish. We heard this particularly with respect to the hatchery fish out of Washington State, down, off the mouth of the Fraser River and down into Puget Sound. Dan, your observation as a fisher, what's the state of the stock out there? Are you able to catch fish if you're allowed to?
Yeah, I haven't fished salmon for 15 years now. After doing it for 40 years, I fish other fish, which are, some of them are in good shape, and in some ways they're managed fairly effectively. The salmon issue, from the fishermen I know that do fish salmon, and this has been the case, as Kathy's mentioned, that we're targeting out here 80% or more American-bound fish. A lot of those fish are being enhanced in the southern U.S. There's all kinds of those fish in the water, and a proper management strategy, which would be an abundance-based model that would allow Canadians access through the treaty, would allow us significant access to that.
Yeah, we'll go through the access issue, which of course has been the focus of a lot of our discussions in the past. But I'm interested in the health of the fish. Mr. Moreau, the fish that are being caught, are they healthy looking? Are they bigger, smaller? What's the quality of the fish look like that's coming into your plants?
Generally speaking, the quality of the fish, the size, the look, I mean, they're healthy. There's no doubt about that. The trend of the amount of fish stocks is obviously low in some areas, but there's many different runs of salmon on many different parts of the coast, and there's always good runs in some areas, bad runs in some areas. And the fact that we may not catch much fish sometimes doesn't mean they're not there. Sometimes it means there's an allocation issue. Sometimes it means it's the commercial fishery is opened after the fish has swam past the area. But
Monsieur le Président, je m'excuse encore une fois. Donc,
I'm sorry once again, there is no interpretation. The person doing the interpretation says the sound is bad. I can hear very well. I don't know if we can check with the interpreter to see if Mr. Moreau's words.
Would you like to suspend a few seconds, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Yes, I can hear Mr. Morrow quite well. Although your sound quality isn't good, sir, and that is a problem, I think, for the interpreter.
Mr. Chair, could you suspend for a few seconds?
Yeah, we'll suspend for a few seconds to see if we can correct the issue.
Merci.
So at your convenience, Mr. Chair, you can resume back.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. What I will say to any of the witnesses, and part of this is due to possibly the internet connection, not necessarily the mic or anything causing a problem. But I would say that if we're asking questions and we can't hear the answer, perhaps the witness could answer in writing and send it into the committee. So I'd ask people who are asking questions to please do it slowly so as the witnesses may get a chance to even jot down the question. So as in case we have to interrupt again because of quality, we can at least get it done and the committee will be able to see the answer in writing versus trying to hear it, whether it's translated or in English or in French. So we'll move forward. I did stop the timer, so we'll go back again to Mr. Hardy. And
how much time do I have left, Mr. Chair?
2.5 minutes exactly.
Oh, lovely. Okay. Ms. Scarfo, you talked about science. And I guess the question I have for you is the science being done and ignored, or is the science not being done? Oops, you're on mute still, ma'am.
This year, as an example, the science is not being done. We used to have the science done. We have a wealth of information within the department. We don't need to create our own science branch within fisheries. If we have access to that information, we can justify fisheries in certain ways at certain times. Without access to that information, we can't do anything. And this year, as an example, when we asked for the science, the background of what the impacts of those fisheries would be so that we could maybe model the fisheries differently, we found out that the science has not been done, that the staff has been instructed for the last 2 years not to do the work.
Now, is there seems to be a conflict between what we're told the state of the stocks are and what we hear from you. We hear that there's fish out there that you're not allowed to catch. We hear, on the other hand, that the stocks are all in decline, or many of them are, and they're simply not the fish that should be caught because of the health of the stocks. Is that a conflict?
No, I think, don't misinterpret. There is a massive decline in salmon, and it is a disaster.
Okay.
What there is there are small pockets of opportunity for the remaining commercial sector. And I'm going to say this, we had 1,800 trawlers originally fishing the west coast of Vancouver Island. This week, I have 25 to 35 trawlers. So when I say there's opportunity for the commercial sector, I'm talking about a very minute fishery.
Thank you for that. I'm going to have to move on in the time I have left. Mr. Bryan, we've heard a lot about the whoosh technology, particularly in the context of Big Bar, but I wanted to ask you what you might know about flood mitigation technology perhaps being used on the Columbia River, because we've heard that old technology is also a problem for some of the salmon stocks along the Fraser.
Yeah, actually, I probably don't have too much to add other than that, of course, the Columbia River has many dams on it which help control the flood events. And so in those kinds of situations, there is more opportunity to control the water. Here at the Fraser River, there was usually a 24-hour or less notice, and you might have a variation of water levels of 10 to 20 feet.
All right, thank you for that.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hardy. 2.5 minutes don't be long going. We'll now go to Madam Gill for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the interpreters. I know very well that their job is difficult and they have to adapt to these COVID conditions. I perhaps misstated what I wanted to say. I wasn't listening passively, but I do understand it's difficult. I have a first question for Mr. Edwards. If he accepts, I'm very interested in his daughter's doctorate subject. If I understand correctly, the fishing sector in the West is having great difficulty. I'm in Eastern Quebec, and I hear similar things here. If he accepts to speak of his daughter's thesis, then perhaps we could know a bit more about this subject and make links to this current topic. That would be great.
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. The thesis is done through the UBC. It's finished. Her doctorate is done. She's now a doctor of philosophy out of UBC. So that thesis is available. It's specifically on the halibut fishery, and it specifically relates to the management issues that arise around creating situations with individual transferable quota fisheries that have led to fishermen having to rent fish at very high lease rates. And it gives solutions, both management and biological, social and economic solutions that were very much in line with the FOPO recommendations
that were done by this committee over the last couple of years. There's solutions available within the conclusions of that thesis. So I would suggest linking into the UBC School of Fisheries, and you can get that thesis. And there's a summary of it as well that I could send.
Merci.
Thank you. I'd like to speak to Ms. Scarfo now. She mentioned that 6 minutes isn't a lot of time to talk, so perhaps she'd like to go into more detail about missed opportunities. This is what she had said, the department's missed opportunities. Thank you.
And I'd like to follow up on the question.
And sorry, this is the clerk, and if I can interrupt, I would ask you to make sure to hold your microphone. Thank you.
Just, I think to follow up with that question, actually, because it does follow up on Ken Hardy's question of, are there a lot of fish out there? There are not a lot of fish out there, but there is also very few commercial fishermen. So the foregone opportunities are for the remaining small amount of commercial fishery that we're basically at that tipping point where we are losing the infrastructure that is absolutely critical, not just to maintaining the commercial fishery, the First Nations fisheries, but also in many of these remote communities, such as fuel docks and just floats. So the lack of management to encourage when there is a small fishery that's available like this year, that would make such a big difference to sustaining the remaining fishermen, needs to be a priority for management, not sort of put aside to the last minute and ignored. And I think that's maybe that's answering your question a little bit.
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you very much. At the same time, I have a little bit more time, Chair. Is that right? 2 minutes? You talked about missed opportunities. You talked about the catastrophic situation. You also said that help should have been asked for, but you didn't have a chance to go through what help is needed. Could you please let us know how we could help? How we could help fishers, salmon fishers, generally. Thank you.
The first thing is to declare it what it is, which is a disaster. And I think that follows up on that. There is not enough salmon to go around for all of the increased participants that the federal government has added over the last number of years, the increased charter business, the increased participation by First Nations. You can't continue to add participants on a declining resource that was already fully allocated. And so therefore you run into a problem there. The help that we need a vision of what the future is going to look like. Are we going to have commercial fisheries in the future? And if so, what are they going to look like? There's no sense saying we support commercial fishing. We know we're not going back to the fisheries of 1,800 boats, but can we not sustain a fishery of 35 commercial boats on the west coast of Vancouver Island, small independent owner-operator fleet, in conjunction with the other fleets that will then maintain the infrastructure? The Canada-US agreement provided $30 million to mitigate the 50% catch reduction on the west coast of Vancouver Island. The government sat on that money for 12 years now. We still haven't allocated that to the fishermen. And basically more of that money has gone to people in different regions than to the people that are actually affected, which is the First Nations and the commercial troll fleet on the west coast. So we need help. We need to tell you what we need rather than having it imposed upon us, which is the normal process, which is the reverse bid buyback, which is basically driving everyone into bankruptcy and then telling them, take as little as you can. And then we end up with this massive derelict boat problem, which costs us all.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Ms. Scarfa.
We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 6 minutes or less, please.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for all the witnesses for your important testimony. I'll start with Ms. Scarfo. Ms. Scarfo, you talked about the disaster of the salmon on the West Coast. Do you believe that the government should be declaring this a salmon emergency right now?
Absolutely. I can't see how you could avoid doing that between Big Bar and all of the other elements that we face and the conflicting interests between user groups. If you don't declare it an emergency, you're basically just pitting the last of the users out here against each other and creating disharmony and not helping in reconciliation in any way, shape, or form.
So if the government were to declare it a salmon emergency, what would you like to see come with that?
Well, I would like to see enough funds, first and foremost, to help the fishermen and the infrastructure that we need to support the industry into the future. We need a discussion on what it is that the goal in managing fisheries on the West Coast is, that has some guiding principles and engages in an honest way, a real consultation with not just the industry participants that remain, but with the coastal communities and within the region, the people that are affected by the declining fishery, and create that vision so that we can then move forward. You can't move forward if you don't have a vision. And right now we don't have that vision of what's expected, because basically what we hear is the vision is dishonest because it's not achievable.
Sure, and we hear about the vision with Canada and the U.S. and the Pacific Salmon Treaty. You talked about, decades ago, that money that was set aside, that 30 million. Can you speak about what's happened with that money and what that money was supposed to be for, and where it's at today?
Well, the catch reduction was, rather than reduce the catch in Alaska completely or pull more dams on the Columbia, Canada took a catch reduction to accommodate the U.S. And in exchange, they provided $30 million U.S. to mitigate the impacts. Well, there was only one fleet that actually lost any fish or took the impacts, and that was the West Coast Troll Fleet. And so the expectation was that we would be provided these funds, and we presented in conjunction with the First Nations through the Aquatic Management Board that Dan has spoken of. 10, 12 years ago, we presented a comprehensive plan as to how to spend that money and how not to just dissolve the licenses once they were bought back, that you would actually bank them with an expectation that we do see a future and that we could maybe reissue these licenses. There was money for enhancement. There was money for all science, for all sorts of things. Instead of listening to the region, the department asked users that were not affected. It would be kind of like asking PEI what they should do with money that is entitled to the South Shore fishermen in Nova Scotia. And that's what they did, and that's what they're doing again. They're asking fishermen from other areas, what should we do with this money? And of course, they're saying, well, give it to us because everybody needs it. So we need a comprehensive plan. We need a vision, and then we need to make those investments, particularly also in promoting the Fisheries Act as the #1 environmental act that we had, that doesn't just deal with in-river habitat, but ocean conditions.
Thank you. Mr. Edwards, can you speak about the injustice of the Pacific Salmon Treaty money and what's been done with that money, and also a little more in depth about the West Coast Aquatic Management Board, the importance of local management boards, both to managing stocks, but also to reconciliation, and what needs to happen at those boards in terms of resources from the federal government?
Yeah, that's going to be hard in a couple of minutes, but I'll try. Basically, the board process, the idea of working together at a community level between First Nations and the community fishermen and the non-Indigenous communities is the heart of the idea of developing that board in order to make sure that there's a proper management structure that would provide socioeconomic benefits to the community. The money that was that Kathy's mentioned, we used the Aquatic Management Board to put a very comprehensive plan in place, and we did that. We met 5 times with Minister Shea at the time, and then we found out through a court case that was done by the Area G troll fishermen when the money wasn't given to who it should have been. We found out that the department had already made a decision before they even started the consultative process. They already decided to give the money to other interests and not use it to mitigate the damage on the West Coast. We were asking right now for the Aquatic Management Board to hold that money in trust for the commercial fishermen and the communities out here on the West Coast. We've asked the cabinet to consider that. We've said this is critical in order to support these communities that are in a position, as Kathy said, of disaster. On that issue of disaster relief, that's what I did back in 1999. I spent 3 months trying to get disaster relief funding
for the collapse of the Fraser sockeye in 1999. That's what I did. It was refused at that time. They just refused to do it, which then led to a 59-day hunger strike, which then led to a consultative review. So I've been down this road before, and it's very frustrating to see it happening again and again here. And we have some resources, and we have the opportunity. It's just being completely denied by the existing power structure within Pacific region.
Thank you, Gord, for that. Their 6 minutes is up. Before I go to the next round of questioning, I just want to emphasize, when you're not speaking, please put your mic on mute. Even the rattling of paper or the sound of you breathing or something is coming through, and that interferes with what people are hearing from the person answering a question or the person asking it. And I'd even ask anyone, in particular, if one of the members of the committee are asking their 6 minutes or 5 minutes of questions, after you ask the question, try and put it on mute, because if you do anything when the answer is trying to come through, that sound comes out. Like I say, it could be as light as your sound of you breathing. It could be a rattling of a piece of paper. So please keep that in mind. We'll now go to our 5-minute round. We'll start off, of course, for 5 minutes or less with Mr. Fast.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Let me begin by just challenging Mr. Hardy's suggestion that there was a lot of conflicting evidence from our witnesses on the problems with the wild salmon fishery. That simply is not the case. In fact, there's been a great deal of consistent testimony throughout. Indeed, except for allocation of and perhaps access to the different fisheries, there's remarkable consistency in testimony. We've heard consistently about dysfunctional DFO. We've heard about lack of stock assessments, failure to base decisions on science, lack of consultation with stakeholders, broken governance models, and much of that has been reaffirmed today at this meeting. So let me begin by just asking a question of Mr. Edwards. You said that we need to dismantle the entire organization. And I just want to be clear about what organization are you referring to? You're referring to DFO's Pacific region or the Regional Aquatic Management Board or some other organization?
I was talking about the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, specifically Pacific region.
Which is, of course, consistent with testimony we've heard at other meetings that are reviewing the decline in salmon stocks. Could you tell us, what would that dismantlement look like in practice? Because, you know, if you dismantle, you have to replace it with something that's going to be effective. And be as brief as possible, because I've got one other question.
That's a very important point. The government of Canada has done all kinds of reorganization. They did it with INAC recently. There's all kinds of ways. There's significant study been done on proper governance models that can be utilized by government in order to put proper consultative and governance frameworks together. The BC, in fact, has a lot of thinkers have done that over the years. I worked with one for years, Craig Darling, who's done all kinds of work for government on how to properly re-engage government with their stakeholders and with First Nations. That work needs to be done.
Well, thank you. If you could expand on that and send that to us in writing, we'd be glad to review that as well. Because I know you don't have a lot of time to expand on it, but we'd be glad to receive something in writing from you. And then a question to both Ms. Scarfo as well as Mr. Miro. Both of you have referenced the U.S. experience. Ms. Scarfo, you talk about the fact that you're taking mostly U.S. fish, but Mr. Miro, you talked about the U.S. Experience. What they did is to protect and restore salmon stocks. Could you both perhaps just respond? What is it that we haven't done in Canada specifically that the U.S. has done successfully to ensure that its salmon stocks remain healthy, whether it's Washington State or up in Alaska?
Scarfo first.
I think they've made it a priority and they've made the investment. They're removing dams on the Columbia. They put money into enhancement and mass marketing, mass hatchery programs in Alaska. salmon has been recognized as a social and cultural driver and takes priority over many, many other interests until recently. And I think the Pebble Mine is a major concern in the U.S. with the present government. But I think overall, historically, they have had owner-operator type policies in their fisheries, and they've recognized that small community-based fisheries are a large part of what keeps a location like Alaska alive. But it's basically a commitment and an investment.
Good, Mr. Muro.
Yeah, I could say that you could answer that yourself by going to the DFO website and then looking at the Alaska Department of Fish and Game website. There's much more transparency, predictability about run size, communication with fishermen, communication with industry. Industry knows beforehand what the plan is, what the allocation process is. In BC here, we are increasingly in the dark. Sometimes DFO tells us they're not allowed to tell us because of court decisions or reconciliation discussion. So it's just a lack of information, a lack of proper stock assessment, and a lack of data. Culminating, you may know that BC no longer has marine stewardship certification on our salmon. Yes, we suspended it as an industry, but it's because DFO has not followed up on their end of the bargain to provide stock assessment and data required for us to hold it. So it's you can see, in looking at the website, it'll become clear yourself.
Thank you. Ms. Garfo, you suggested that there has to be disaster relief for your industry. We know that the commercial processors and harvesters have a special fund or special funds that address the impact of COVID on their industries. The disaster relief you're referring to is much broader than just COVID, I assume.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt about it. COVID has an impact on everyone, has an impact on our industry, has an impact on how we can fish, how we can deliver fish, where we move fish to. Our buyers are not wanting to, deliver to the States if they don't have to, and I don't blame them. We haven't got the infrastructure and the capacity in some of these regions to even handle the fishery. So we knew this year with COVID there was going to be impacts. The program that was put out, which basically is a maximum of $10,000, doesn't cover your annual fixed costs of moorage insurance and maintenance on your boat. So it's not going to do much. It doesn't provide enough to add on top of the relief that is needed because we've got previous years of hardship. So basically, COVID is just sort of like the last straw on top of everything else. And so I think the disaster relief that's needed is much more comprehensive and broader reaching.
You said that social scientists...
Mr. Fast, we're going way over time. Hopefully we'll get some more questions in. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 5 minutes or less, please.
Oh, thank you again, Mr. Chair. Ed and Kathy, talk to us about foreign fishing and illegal, unregulated fishing. Do you see that as also affecting the health of our stocks? We'll start with Dan.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on illegal fisheries. I don't think that illegal fishing at the Canadian level within the 200-mile limit is necessarily a problem here in Canada. Foreign ownership is definitely an issue that's been raised repeatedly. It was raised in the FOPO discussions, and we've asked for very simple tracking. All you have to do to start that.
Yeah, no, Dan, sorry, I'm talking about foreign vessels catching fish. Yep. We see pictures of these large factory fish scooping up everything that's alive and probably a bunch that isn't. Do you see that as a problem?
If you read a book called Outlaw Ocean, you will see that there's been an increase overall with distant water fishing, but it's not evident here, specifically within the 200-mile limit. Whether there's examples of it where it's impacting our salmon as they travel well offshore, that may be possibly a problem. There's people looking into that right now, actually, and they're doing some studies on it.
Right. Ms. Garfo, any comments there?
I don't think I could really comment. There is no foreign ownership in the actual existing fleet. Whether there's illegal fleets within the 200-mile limit, I would tend to think we probably have decent enforcement. But we have seen in the last 20 years a massive increase in the drag trawl fleet offshore that obviously has an impact on salmon, and that whether that ownership within the hake and that is foreign, I couldn't say, but I think that is a concern that we've gone from the small boat fleet to an increasingly large vessel fleet.
A lot of the discussions that we've had, and this is going back to the exchange I've had indirectly with Ed, has really a lot to do with who gets access to a finite resource, and a resource that now everybody agrees has been shrinking. What do we do? What is your advice as somebody who's got a material interest in the health of the fishing industry? What do we do to build the stocks, right? Rather than argue over who gets to catch what's left, what do we do to actually build the stocks? Does anybody have a point of view, an opinion, a thought on that? Just raise your hand and I'll go to you.
I would like to speak to that.
Go ahead,
That's
please.
Brad.
Yes, Brad.
You said rebuild the stock, but you started by asking about allocation, and I would say I would like to have a broader fix to this. I think that if the federal government views themselves somewhat as an employer of fishermen, or in the sense they've set policy over the years that has given fishermen a job and a license, policies have changed, allocation policies have changed, Indigenous
Brad,
reconciliation has changed.
Yeah.
You can't hear me?
I can hear you fine, but that's not where I'm going with the question. What do we do to rebuild stocks so that we don't need to have this discussion about who gets access to what's left?
More stock assessment, hatcheries, and stock enhancement and control of predators. That's a good start.
Okay, good. Anybody else with a comment there?
Yeah, it's Dan here. I spent 15 years as a head of a Thornton Enhancement Society here in Ucluelet. At the same time in Southeast Alaska, a similar situation happened back in 1979. They have in Juneau, Alaska now a hatchery that produces, I think it's 50 million pinks, 10 million chum, 5 million coal and chinook. In the community where I live, they reluctantly allow us to raise 50,000 chinook. It's a complete lack of vision around how to actually rebuild. And that's been a real problem here in BC for years.
Okay. Kathy, you were saying that, the Alaska runs, you catch Alaskan fish and the Alaskans catch Canadian fish. The Alaskans seem to be doing well. We're not. Now, there seems to be a disconnect here. Are you saying that the Alaskan runs, in fact, are poor and the Canadian runs aren't? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, the fish go from Alaska down to Washington, Oregon, and California. Those are the stocks that we're harvesting. We're not harvesting Alaskan fish. Alaskans are harvesting Canadian fish that would come to us within our area, so we reciprocate and harvest some of theirs as they go by. Alaska's doing well. Washington, Oregon, there's definitely stocks of concern. There's no denying that there's problems everywhere. But they're seeing, massive hatchery programs and massive investment and good opportunities on those fisheries for their fleets. And I think when you talk about rebuilding, you have to have a strategy to rebuild, and you have to have a commitment and an investment. And we've gutted those programs over the years. I know going to area licensing, we were supposed to increase the number of stakeholders in a given area, but we've abolished that by not allowing people to actually feel like they have a future in the industry and make those commitments as volunteers in many of those areas, and then not being allowed. I mean, in certain cases, we weren't even allowed to feed the brood stock that we had because they would then be hatchery and not wild. So there's a dispute between the wild and the wild salmon policy. But I think you have to deal with allocation in the meantime, because you're not going to rebuild salmon within a 4-year cycle. It's going to take longer than that. So the allocation issues and the expectations that some groups have that they can continue to expand, such as the recreational fishery that has grown exponentially time and time again over the last decade, and the expectations within the First Nations that by reconciliation, they will be seeing economically viable opportunities when we can tell them within the commercial industry that economic viability is not something that you're seeing for very many people within the industry, and it's hit and miss, and it's going to be a problem as we go along.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. We'll now go to Mr. Calkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is for Scarfo. Scarfo, you mentioned that you catch primarily, the trawling fleet catches primarily American fish. The United States marks, I believe, 100% of their hatchery fish. Do you see a price difference between a fish that's marked as a hatchery fish or a natural spawn fish? Do you get a price differential on that at all?
No, the simple answer is no. And even at this present time, when I talk about foregone opportunity, we're not allowed to retain coho on the west coast of Vancouver Island, even though biological staff over the years has said there is opportunity with very marginal impact on Canadian endangered stocks, to the tune of, if we had a fishery that harvested, say, 20,000 coho on the west coast of Vancouver Island, it would maybe harvest 1 or 2 Fraser-bound coho that would be considered endangered, and usually there's some flexibility in that number when we manage other fisheries. The situation right now is so absurd that we are actually being forced to throw back American hatchery coho in our fishery. So we're landing coho in our Chinook fishery that are hatchery marked bound for the US that we know are not an endangered species, that would provide some cushion in the diversification of opportunities. And we're having to throw them back, and it just seems absolutely absurd.
And depending on the nature of the hatchery, if it's a conservation hatchery or whether it's a hatchery that's designed to actually put more fish into the ocean, we're actually returning. What you're saying is you're returning some of those fish that were actually meant to be captured.
Absolutely.
Yep. Yeah. A question for you, Ms. Scarfo, and maybe Mr. Moreau. A lot of discussion has been made about investments and how the department and how the governments of the day invest their money. There's a litany of investments, some small, some large, on the Department of Fisheries and Oceans website, announcements made by local MPs or the minister. Many of these I look at and go, I don't see this as being a direct related issue to the Department of Fisheries or the enhancement of fisheries at all. These seem to be tangential issues meant more to appease special interest groups. Would any of you care to suggest or talk about whether or not you think the department is actually investing in things that will make a consequential difference?
I can speak to that briefly. I'm sure that the larger the government, the worse some of the spending is, but I'd like to see more spending on counting of the fish, because you can't catch what you can't see, and you need to be able, I'll give you an example about the Alaskan fish being caught. The Southeast Alaska will catch the chums, we won't. We are not allowed to catch them because the stock assessment is not there. Our DFO will not let us catch American chums in the Prince Rupert area because they have insufficient stock assessment. We need more, better stock assessment on the grounds, counting of the fish, monitoring of the fish, for sure.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move over now to Mr. Bryan with your whoosh system. Very interesting technology. You said you captured images of about 18 images of a fish that goes through, and with the 6 tubes, you could move about 30 fish per minute. That's a lot of technology that you have at your disposal. Are you able to detect whether or not a fish has a coded wire tag in it when it goes through your equipment?
We are seeing, yes, that and other tagging techniques that are being used on the Fraser.
If you're able to capture that kind of information, then you must be able to determine whether or not a fish has gone through your system twice. So can you tell this committee anything about how many of the fish that you send over the big bar slide return actually back through the slide and go through your system again? What is that percentage, if any?
We don't have that information yet. We are in a current situation where we cannot get the data direct as a real-time feed to us, so it's having to be transferred physically. And so we're a couple weeks behind, and so we don't have that information yet, but everybody's working on those.
Is that data collection at risk, and who will have access to that raw data when you're done with it? Do you hand it directly over to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, or are you allowed to keep it with your own firm and disclose it publicly?
We are required to give it to the DFO.
Okay, how many fish to date have you seen? Can you give the committee any indication how many fish to date have you moved from below the slide to above?
Yeah, I can, as of a couple of days ago, the number was about 5,000 that have gone through the whoosh system.
Okay.
That have been transported above.
Okay, and that's specifically one species or all species?
We've seen Chinook and sockeye. Those are primarily sockeye.
Those are the two. So primarily sockeye. Okay. Thank you very much for that. I would be very curious to find out what that data actually is, Mr. Chair. So I'll use a little bit of this time to make a request that we actually send a letter to the minister requesting updates on the amount of fish that this system is moving in a timely manner and reporting back to the committee. There should be no reason that information shouldn't be available to this committee. How much time do I have left, Mr. Chair?
You're up.
Thank you.
But what I would ask, Mr. Calkins, I don't know if you're making that as a form of motion or you're just asking for agreement of the committee to request that information.
Well, Chair, I'm not making a formal motion. I would be surprised if anybody at the committee would say no to it. But if we want to have that discussion later, I'd be more than happy to entertain it.
There is a current count that is provided on the DFO website, just for your, that's provided daily, but
okay.
Not by species.
Not by species. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are directed to Mr. Miro and primarily and probably Ms. Scarfo. There's been a lot of discussion in this particular meeting and in meetings in the past of FOPO, the analysis between BC management of the salmon fishery and the American-Alaskan management. Alaska's doing it well. My first question would be, Mr. Miro, you referred to the need for proper and robust signs. How is Alaska competing with us in that particular area?
Put it simply, you cannot catch what you don't count. You can't count what you don't see, and you can't see what you don't look for. So Alaska is identifying their fish stocks. They have more boots on the ground, people walking streams, drones, boats on the grounds looking. Quite often in northern BC, our fisheries, our fish get identified by commercial fishermen. Then they tell DFO. Then DFO struggles to have a budget to get a boat out to look. So the stock assessment here is
I am sorry, Mr. Miro, again. Would it be possible for you to take the microphone a bit? Move it a bit.
Further away. Sorry about that. Yeah, so our stock assessment on the grounds is really pathetic in British Columbia compared to Alaska. They just have more boots on the ground, more assets, and more priority to look for the fish and count the fish.
So nobody referenced, and I just want for clarification, is there no salmon farming done in Alaska in comparison to BC, the same type of fish farming done in BC to Alaska?
There is none.
There's none? Because
that's right.
Okay. An earlier,
it's not allowed, actually. Not only is there none, it's not allowed.
So it's not allowed. Because in an earlier committee meeting, a witness referenced, and nobody really spoke to it today, referenced that salmon farms are one of the single biggest issues harming natural salmon stocks. Would any of the witnesses today agree with that? Madame Scarfo, Mr. Miro?
I would say there's been ample evidence from the Cohen inquiry all the way through that fish farms are a significant problem. And if you've got a significant problem that you know exists, the precautionary approach would dictate that you don't allow them to continue, just as you don't allow fisheries to take place if you are posing significant risk. And I think there's been evidence that there's significant risk at this point.
Because we do seem to be coming to a consensus that Alaska is managing the salmon fishery better than Canada in BC. Is that a fair statement?
I would say so, and I think I would follow up on what my colleague mentioned, in that if you don't have boots on the ground, you don't have the information. And without the information, you can't basically manage. So you basically abdicate management if you don't go out and get that information. We have an example just this week. We know that Fraser River Run is an absolute disaster. The only way we know what's happening on the Fraser River before the fish actually arrive at the river are test fisheries. So you send out commercial boats, and in a pattern that's evolved over a century, you basically compare catches in certain gauntlet areas to determine whether or not there are more fish coming, and if so, what part of the run that you're starting to see come. So you DNA sample them, you code-wire tag fish and that. So if you don't have test fisheries, you can't manage a fishery. So they shut down the test fishery early this year on Fraser River, where we know that there is a significant problem, and now we have no eyes on the water. Pink fisheries have been abolished in certain areas because we used to send in a couple of either a small fleet and say, fish, if there's fish, we'll continue to fish, otherwise you're closed and that's it. Those are abolished. Test fishing going out. In our fishery, it's different than Chinook's a different beast than sockeye. It's a 6-year cycle. So the data sets that we establish within our commercial fleet are very critical. The recreational fleet now harvests more than the First Nations and commercial combined, and yet they have a voluntary compliance on either even letting us know how many fish they've caught at the dock or in sampling. So our data set that we're relying on is coming from a smaller portion of the fishery at any given time, and basically the commercial fleet, and historical data when we actually had large fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. So you got about 3 seconds left. I don't think you'll get to say much in the way of a question in that length of time. We'll now go to Madame Gill for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for Mr. Miro, Ms. Scarfo, Mr. Edwards, any of you. In your introductory comments, I'm not sure who said it, but there was this question of conflict of interests between the department and others. Could someone please go into more detail on this question?
I can answer that. One potential massive conflict would be DFO managing fish farms as well as wild fisheries. If there is a question and the science isn't settled about the safety of fish farms, and I think there's at least the perception of a conflict of interest there. And all of the allocation agreements, there is a conflict if the fish managers are actually in the discussion and they're the ones making the decision. I think it's a conflict.
Monsieur le Président.
Chair, there is no interpretation at this time. I could perhaps directly ask Mr. Miro if he could speak less quickly. I understand English. Apparently there's no interpretation because of difficulties we've had. And if not, perhaps I could receive a written response as well. Sorry, Mr. Miro, would you like to go ahead with your answer?
I'm happy to reply in writing also. But one example I mentioned was DFO being responsible for fish farms as well as the wild capture fisheries. I believe there is the potential for massive conflict on decision making with those two files.
There's another major conflict as well. It has to do with the federal government's fiduciary responsibility to First Nations, and it's been very clear in court cases here in British Columbia that because of that conflict, there needs to be, when discussing the management and the allocation of resources within the fishing industry, that the stakeholder interests need to be at the table. Otherwise, the government of Canada and its bureaucracy cannot, without being in a conflict, actually represent our interests, and that's a conflict.
Yeah, and I would like to follow up on that. Yeah, fish farms is definitely a conflict. Maybe that should be in the Ministry of Agriculture and allow fisheries to be managed by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. I think the buying of licenses, the transfer programs where DFO manages opportunity and then tries to manage buying licenses at best value for dollar is a major conflict of interest. They basically starve you out and then offer to buy your license in a reverse bid where you compete with each other. I think that's just unquestionably a conflict of interest. And I think DFO being leads in negotiations on reconciliation and also providing fishing opportunities and allocation, I think is also something that should be removed from the department. And I think just to follow up on that, I think when I said something about social engineering before, who, where, and when and how fish are caught determines the cultural and the coastal community quality of life in so many ways that if the department is now engaged in who, when, and where, and how, to the degree that they are more than there's fishing opportunities, therefore let's figure out how to harvest them, then you've changed what the role of the department is, and they are in conflict with their primary mandate.
Thank you, Madame Gill. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you. Mr. Moreau, Ms. Scarfo, you talked about Alaska and the U.S. and how much they've invested in their fisheries, whether it be in restoration enhancement, but particularly in monitoring and assessment. Can you talk about what the scale is? Like, what does it look like, their investment compared to Canadian investment? Do either of you want to touch on that, or do you have any idea what that looks like?
I can provide something in writing later, but for the scale of stock assessment, I can tell you that almost every river system in Alaska is counted and monitored. You could see on their websites very minute streams and rivers and the counts of coho and Chinook and pinks and chums. You just don't see that in British Columbia.
Mr. Edwards, we've talked about reconciliation, and we, even with the New Channelth court case, the judge said that the government went to the table knowingly empty-handed, with no intention of resourcing an agreement. Can you talk about what is necessary for reconciliation and resources that are needed to actually follow through with true reconciliation?
Big questions, but the reality is that the government has had a mechanism for transfer for years, and they've had principles around that for years. Back in the 90s, Art May reiterated those principles very clearly, that they enter into a buying up of existing access and transfer that over into First Nations in order to make sure that the Canadian government, the Canadian people are paying for reconciliation and not individual businesses or enterprises, which would be unfair to that enterprise. So when the court case came about in the House et al. Court case, the lawyers for the First Nations were very clear. Yes, there is there's a win here for your ability to catch fish, but you have to work within the framework of transferring properly from the existing resource to your fishery. And they've been doing that to some degree, but in some instances, for instance, with Chinook, the federal government, in fact, has transferred 5,000 Chinook from the Area G troll fishery without the requisite buying up of the Area G licenses to justify that, which is exactly what I mentioned, which is exactly what they've done with this commercial sports fishery here in BC. When you do that, you undermine the existing fisheries with people that have had 40 or 50 years of engagement, both capital and social and financial engagement in a fishery, and you've just ripped their livelihood away from them with no compensation. And so the need to do it properly is really critical. And because it's a court-appointed fishery, the Canadian government has to make sure that it actually satisfies the needs that were recognized by that court case by doing it properly.
Thank you, Gord. That closes up our questioning for today to our witnesses. I'd like to thank the witnesses, of course, for appearing today and providing us with some valued information to the committee members when it comes to the writing of this report and getting it finally completed later on. I will give a moment now for the witnesses to sign off so as we can go directly into committee business. So again, thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, Nancy, I think we're ready. I think the witnesses have signed off. I don't see anything on my screen indicating that they haven't. So for everyone's interest, I guess, we do know that today is the last meeting that was planned for our July and August meetings under the order of a vote later in June that was given that we could operate on these dates. So basically, we have to look at where to from here. Right now, I think everybody may be under an assumption that the House will sit again on September 21st until we hear otherwise. We don't know if that will happen or not, and we certainly haven't been told what the plan is. So we don't know if we will be back to a normal committee schedule when that time arrives, or if we have to try and find a time slot going forward that we can do this. We don't know if we'll be able to do it twice a week as we normally would when the House will be sitting. We do know that it's limited time and limited availability of staff and the resources, I guess, to do this virtually as we have been doing twice in July and twice in August. But as well, we have to know, what do we start when we meet again? Do we continue on with the salmon study and get that done before we get into something else? My personal preference is to finish what we're doing and get that completed, because it seems to be a broad study and we're hearing some great testimony. I'd really like to see this one completed and presented to the House sooner rather than later, than skipping it, going to something else and then come back to this. I'd like to see it go that way, but I want to hear from the committee members to see what their wishes are. Mr. Hardy.
Yeah, we're looking at the witness lists that have been put forward, and to see if, in fact, we have people that we need to hear from and sectors we need to hear from. Based on what we've seen so far, we would probably need, I'd say, 2 more with witnesses plus 1 session with the officials. And perhaps we could work drafting instructions in at the end of the session with the officials. So that would be a total of 3. But I don't know, Mel and Gord, you also had your shopping list of people that you wanted to hear from. And if we haven't heard from them yet, we've gone this far. I think we need to invest the time to make sure that it's done, coherently and thoroughly.
Mel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Looking at who we've heard from so far, I would agree we need 2 to 3 more meetings after today. We have heard from one side on the salmon aquaculture issue. We haven't heard from the aquaculture farmers themselves yet in this study. We have some science that we haven't heard from. Are you hearing me okay, Mr. Chair? Oh, okay. I see you're frowning. I thought maybe you were having trouble hearing me. So I'd agree. I'd rather finish this study before we move on to another new one. And we need to finish this one so that it's rounded out. If we don't hire or bring in a well-rounded committee list, we risk the chance of the report being dismissed as incomplete or by some of the other stakeholders if we haven't heard from them.
Mr. Fest. You're on mute, Ed.
My apologies. I agree with Mel that if we issue a report in which key stakeholders have not participated, and they come back and they criticize the report and say, listen, we weren't consulted, so how can this be a set of recommendations that has any real weight or credibility? We will have failed what I think promises to be a pretty major report and set of recommendations that hopefully moves the protection and the enhancement of our wild salmon stocks forward. So again, I would think we would want to have at least 3 more meetings with witnesses. Obviously, our team will get back to you, Mr. Chair, with additional witnesses that we hope will fill the gaps in testimony that still exist. And then perhaps 1 more meeting for drafting instruction.
Thanks for that, Ed. Before I go to Gord, I know, Gord, you have your hand up. I will say there are still a lot of witnesses that have been put forward that haven't been heard from yet, that we haven't scheduled. So I think you're right in what we need to hear from and how broad this should be. Gord?
Yeah, I support what Ed was saying in terms of 3 more meetings and then 1 more with senior staff coming back to us. So we would be in agreement with that.
I see people nodding their heads and whatnot. Ken? Madam Gill?
Yes, I'd just like to add my voice to that of the others. Of course, for the question of having a good representation, I definitely agree. We need to have people from various sectors so that our study is complete and done properly with due diligence. And we would obviously need to have a certain number of sessions to be able to hear them.
So I am hearing I don't see any more hands raised. So I am hearing a consensus, I think, to continue on with the salmon study to get it finished. Maybe 3 or possibly 4 more meetings, including the officials. I really like the option of bringing the officials back last after we've heard from all the witnesses, because then we can kind of counteract maybe what they said at the beginning, or hit them with what we've heard thus far before we do the actual writing of the report. The only thing I would suggest probably for timelines is, why don't I keep an eye on when we can get our meetings started to schedule once we find out what's going on with the House, and get our request in early before other committees do, and that way we might get on the docket earlier rather than later, and keep the committee members informed as we go forward of anything we hear on the option of when we can do our meetings and the time slots that are available, to get a consensus of what suits everybody else. Is everybody okay with looking at it in that type of manner? And with the number of witnesses, I'll get to you, Mel, in a second. With the number of witnesses, I would say we'll see who's available and when they're available once we see what meeting slots we can fit in. And like I say, if we need 2 more, 3 more, or 4 more meetings, let's clue this one up before we actually get into something else, because I think if we leave it too long, we'll lose the flavour of probably some of the recommendations we'd like to see go forward to the department at the end of the day. So, Mel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree, and thank you for looking into getting us in early if possible. I think we see a situation on the West Coast that's very dire right now with the salmon. These people need help. The industry, the economy, and Indigenous, non-Indigenous, it's a big issue. So I think we need to carry on with this and get it wrapped up and get those recommendations in. Thank you.
Yeah. Terry, do you have your hand up?
No, I didn't, but it's nice to see everybody. It's the last couple of days have been very informative.
Oh, and it has been. I think this entire study has been eye-opening, if nothing else. And I'd like to see a real good report presented and go back to the House or to the Ministry or whoever's going to answer to it and try and do something. And I go back to Mr. Donnelly's comments the other day of we've got an opportunity of doing a good report, making good recommendations, and parking the political stripe at the door or outside the room, whichever we're doing this by, either virtually or in the House. And I look forward to that and look forward to a good report. Somebody waved. Gord.
All right, got distracted for a second. When do we meet next?
We don't know yet, Gord. We've met our number of meetings that was passed in the earlier motion, and the number that we were supposed to do in July and August. In September, I'm sure there are discussions ongoing, I would think, as to whether the House is going to open on the 21st of September or if it's not. And there'll be discussions, I guess, on how often and what times committees can meet. Because as we know, at the beginning, we were limited to the times we could meet because other committees were meeting and you could only do so many of these virtual at the one time. So I think we have to try and get that in as soon as possible. The 22nd, 24th and 29th are probably options for us to start meeting, but that would depend on what happens with the discussion, if it's everybody back in Ottawa or if it's everybody the way we are right now. So I think we got to try and find that out first before we can nail down the actual dates. But at least we can get a request in on those particular days to try and make sure we're early on the list.
Mr. Chair, would you want some clarifications from me?
Yes, if you can, that'd be great.
So just to make sure that procedurally you have all the correct information, the committee right now is meeting by video conference on Zoom, according to the motion that was adopted by the House on May 26. And that motion does not prevent the committee to meet again in August or September. It has not been scheduled yet because the motion adopted by the committee on June 1st was to meet specifically in July, August. And if it is the will of the members, they can talk to their whips and they can try to meet faster or sooner, or to wait after June 21st. But procedurally speaking, nothing is preventing the committee to request for more meetings.
Okay, but you mentioned, Nancy, talking to the various party whips about that. Do we need the permission of the various party whips in order to meet any more, say, whether it be in August or whether it be in early September?
If the committee is to say today that they want to meet faster, because from what I hear is the committee would want to discuss the Pacific salmon sooner than later, then the committee can definitely discuss the date to add more meetings anywhere between now and later in September or early September before the House resumes. But that would have to be a decision of the committee. And then if the committee decides that, then the suggestion would be sent to the whips of the party, and a date and a meeting room would have, we would try to find a place for the meetings.
Okay, thank you for that, Nancy. So you've all heard that. I shouldn't have to explain it. So the option is there if we decide we want to meet earlier and put in some meetings before the House is actually scheduled to sit. And of course, that would require a motion from somebody and discussion and a vote and whatever. So I don't know if anybody is looked at a calendar or decided anything on that today, or if you want to put forward suggestions going forward that we can send out to everybody, or if it has to come to a vote, we'll have to get the committee together. Mr. Hardy.
I think that, you mentioned, Mr. Chair, I think it was the 22nd, 24th, and 29th of September, when we're probably back to a little bit more normal, whatever that looks like. I suggest we stick with that rather than trying to shoehorn additional meetings in now before Parliament comes back. I think we need to, obviously respect the work that has to be done to get the witnesses all lined up, and give us a little time too to digest what we've heard so far and really be primed for the next round of questioning that we're going to put out there.
Madam Gill.
You'll correct me if I've misunderstood, but I think that in the last discussions we talked many times about the urgency of this salmon question, the urgency of Big Bar as well. There have been a number of postponements in our study. I would like to see if we could have meetings to wrap up this study and provide recommendations earlier, given the urgency of this question.
Okay, and anybody else? No, so is everybody, do we want to have a comment on Madam Gill's view to do it earlier, or even on Mr. Hardy's view with the 22nd, 24th, and 29th? Mr. Arnold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we can not make the decision today so that we can consult with our teams and whips before we move forward, but certainly be prepared for September 21st when the House is set to resume.
I agree with Ken Hardy on the 22nd as a starting point. I think it gives us time to digest as well as make sure that we're prepared and get good witnesses to follow through on this. And as well as we're all looking at a very unsure time where we're sending our kids back to school. You know, there's talk of the second wave. Let's see how that settles before we start getting into taking on things too early.
Agree.
Can you unmute yourself, Mr. Chair?
Thanks, everyone. And it's mute and unmute too often today, I think. I think we'll go ahead, Mel, as you mentioned, and say, let's plan on the 22nd, 24th, and 29th. Give us a chance to talk to the various leadership teams and whatnot to see if that's going to be suitable and if we can get those dates. If we want to add some along the way, we can. And like somebody said, it'll give us a chance to recharge, I guess, and review some that we've already heard, and before we hear from more witnesses again or getting any names that we want to put on that witness list. So hearing nothing else, we'll leave it at that. Nancy, we will try and get a request in to make sure we get time allotted for the 22nd, 24th, and 29th, virtually if necessary, and we won't know that, I guess, till everybody finally finalizes what Parliament will look like on September 21st when it comes back. And hopefully, if by chance it's with everybody in Ottawa, fine. If it's not, we'll have our request already in for 22nd, 24th, and 29th. So I will leave it at that. If anyone else has any other comment, hearing nothing, I'll bid farewell to everybody. Thank Nancy and the analysts and the interpreters for, again, another great job today and great participation from all. Again, thanks for that, everyone. We'll be in touch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Be well, everyone.
Enjoy.